Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into a genuinely thrilling story out of the highlands of West Sumatra. We're talking about fierce internal division, a desperate struggle against foreign intervention, and ultimately a unifying stand against imperialism. We're going to explore the incredible life and legacy of Tuanku Imam Bonjol, and we'll see exactly how a highly localized religious reform movement completely transformed into one of the most intense anti-colonial resistance wars in Indonesian history. So picture this. What actually happens when a bitter, deeply entrenched civil war gets interrupted by a massive colonial empire? Do the warring factions just double down on their hatred for one another? Or do they somehow realize that this new external threat is way more dangerous than their internal differences? Keep that question in mind as we go, because what unfolds in West Sumatra in the early 19th century is just a masterclass in division, intervention, and ultimate unity.
Section 1. A House Divided, the Origins of the Padri War. Right, so before taking on the Dutch, our protagonist was actually totally embroiled in a fierce internal conflict that kicked off in 1803. He was born in 1772 in Pasaman, West Sumatra, and his birth name was Muhammad Shahab, though, back in his youth, he went by a few names like Pento Sharif or Malim Basa. Coming from a deeply religious family, he immersed himself in Islamic theology and law. Eventually, he builds this incredibly powerful religious stronghold in the village of Bonjol, and it was there that his spiritual and military leadership earned him the title we know him by today, Tuanku Imam Bonjol, literally the leader or imam of Bonjol. To really understand this, we have to look at the two groups at the center of the Padri War, because the contrast is stark. On one side, we've got the calm Padri. These were Islamic Puritans inspired by Wahhabi reform movements over in Mecca, and Imam Bonjol was a huge figure here. Their goal? To completely cleanse Minangkabau society of anything they viewed as un-Islamic. We're talking bans on cockfighting, gambling, alcohol, opium use, the whole shebang. On the flip side, you have the Kaum Adat. These were the traditional nobility and local villagers fighting tooth and nail to protect their matriarchal customs, known as Adat, alongside Islam. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. Actually, scratch that. It was a fundamental clash of cultural identity that just exploded into open warfare across the highlands.
Section 2. The Dutch Intervention. Taking advantage of a divided society.
And this is exactly when external empires strike, right? They exploit local instability. As the Padre movement gained serious momentum, the traditionalists, the Kaum Adat, realized they were losing ground fast. So in 1821, they make an incredibly desperate pact. They literally sign a treaty with the Dutch colonial government. In a classic yet tragic historical maneuver, the Kaum Adat ceded their own land and sovereignty to the Dutch, all in exchange for military backup against Imam Bonjol's forces. Basically, the Civil War just kicked the door wide open for a colonial takeover.
Section 3. The Great Reconciliation. United against the Empire.
But here is where Imam Bonjol shows his brilliance. He quickly realizes that a fractured society absolutely cannot stand up to encroaching Dutch imperialism. The huge turning point comes down to this one quote from 1833, Adat Basandi Syarak, Syarak Basandi Kitabullah, meaning, custom is based on Islamic law, and Islamic law is based on the Quran. Seeing the Dutch moving in, Imam Bonjol used this beautifully shared principle to unite the warring Padri and Adat factions. He essentially wove their traditional customs and Islamic identity together, creating a cultural cornerstone that, amazingly, still defines Minangkabau society to this day. Because of that genius 1833 reconciliation, everything changes. The conflict completely shifts. It's no longer an internal civil war, it becomes a fierce, totally unified anti-colonial resistance against the Dutch Empire. The Dutch rolled in thinking they were going to easily conquer a divided people. Instead, they suddenly found themselves staring down a fully united and incredibly highly motivated West Sumatran resistance. Talk about a game changer.
Section 4. The Siege of Fort Bonjol, 1833 to 1837. The Dutch were banking on a quick victory, but Imam Bonjol was an absolute master of military strategy. His base, Fort Bonjol, became the epicenter of the resistance, and its defenses were insane. We're talking high soil walls, impossibly dense bamboo fortifications, and deep defensive moats. And to top it off, Imam Bonjol used the rugged mountainous terrain of West Sumatra to launch relentless guerrilla strikes. These tactics drove the heavily armed Dutch troops crazy and made capturing the fort an absolute nightmare.
Now, to be fair, there is some key historical context that bought the resistance some very valuable time.
The Dutch were actually forced to negotiate temporary truces with Imam Bonjol. Why? Well, they were stretched incredibly thin. Their military was distracted fighting another legendary anti-colonial figure, Prince Diponegoro, over in the Java War from 1825 to 1830. Because of that parallel conflict, the Dutch just didn't have the manpower to crush Imam Bonjol's newly unified front. But, as you might guess, that distraction didn't last forever. Once the Java War ended, the Dutch pivoted their full imperial might right back to Sumatra. Generals Van den Bosch and Cochius brought in elite redeployed troops and massive heavy artillery. The firepower was just overwhelming. Finally, after a grueling, brutal 3-year siege, the formidable defenses of Fort Bonjol gave way in August 1837.
Section 5. The Betrayal and Exile, a Trap Disguised as Peace.
Imam Bonjol actually survived the fall of the fort and kept up a sporadic resistance. But seeing the horrific toll the war was taking on everyday civilians, he finally agreed to peace negotiations. And this is where the deceptive nature of the colonial empire rears its ugly head. On October 28, 1837, Dutch resident Francis invites him to the town of Palapu to talk peace. But it was a trap. In a heartbreaking repeat of history, literally exactly how they captured Prince Diponegoro 7 years earlier, he was arrested the absolute second he arrived. And they weren't taking any chances with him. To stop him from inciting any more rebellions, the Dutch dragged him on a brutal, years-long trail of exile. First, they sent him to Cianjur, West Java, in 1837. Then, they shipped him thousands of miles away to Ambon in Maluku in 1839. Finally, in 1841, he was moved to Lada, Penelling, in North Sulawesi. Moving him around this much just goes to show you exactly how terrified the Dutch were of his influence and his ability to rally the people, even as a prisoner.
Section 6. A Unified Legacy, the Statesman of West Sumatra.
Tuanku Imam Bonjol spent the last 23 years of his life in exile in Minahasa, North Sulawesi, eventually passing away on November 6, 1864, at the incredibly ripe old age of 92. But here's the thing. His physical defeat didn't even put a dent in his cultural achievement. He left behind this towering anti-colonial legacy. He's not just remembered as a fierce military leader who fought off an empire, but as the statesman who successfully fused traditional Minangkabau custom with Islamic identity. He healed a broken society.
Okay, let's think about the number 5,000 for a second. Why does that matter to us today? Well, it represents the 5,000 Indonesian rupiah banknote issued back in 2001. If you've ever had one of those specific notes in your wallet, you've been looking right at a portrait of Imam Bonjol. They placed him there to honor his monumental anti-colonial struggle, making sure everyday citizens literally carry his legacy with them. And that everyday recognition, it is backed up by the very highest official honors. In 1973, the Indonesian government officially cemented his incredible legacy, declaring Tuanku Imam Bonjol a National Hero of Indonesia, a Pahlawan Nasional. It is the ultimate proof of his journey from a local faction leader in a civil dispute to an enduring, undeniable national icon of resistance and unity.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final powerful thought. If fractured, deeply warring communities can successfully unite to challenge one of the most powerful empires in the world, what other seemingly impossible victories can human solidarity achieve today? Imam Bonjol's story is living proof that our differences, no matter how deep they seem, can absolutely be bridged when we recognize our shared struggles. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this truly fascinating chapter of history. I hope it leaves you wanting to dive even deeper into the incredible power of unity.